Now that we've talked a little bit about the bystander effect and learned about some of the problems that it can cause, we're going to talk about some of the obstacles to helping out people in these kind of situations and what research shows us that we can do to overcome them. So, the first obstacle I'd like to talk about is just being on autopilot, being in a hurry, not being mindful, not paying attention, not even really ever noticing the opportunity to help to begin with. You know, obviously, if you don't notice somebody's in need of help, you don't notice there's a problem, you can't respond effectively to it. So, you know, what can you do to actually become better at noticing people in need of help? I mean, obviously, you can't just tell yourself to pay more attention in that moment itself, because if you don't notice, there's a catch-22 there. But what you can do is you can actually learn to do some of the simple steps of stopping, stepping back, and stepping in that we teach in this lesson in your daily life. Like before you make a judgment about something or before you take into a situation, just build into the little habit of taking a small pause, stopping for reflection, consciously deciding what you think is going on, and then acting based on that reflective moment. Like just practicing doing that throughout the day a few times can make you more likely to notice certain kinds of situations that are going on around you. Now, a major problem when we're trying to help another person, or when somebody might have a natural inclination to lend a hand, is something that we like to call the diffusion of responsibility. And what that means is that if you're by yourself and you're with, only one other person, and that person, is in need of your help, you're very responsible. Like you're the only person that can help that person out, and you naturally tend to respond in a helpful way. But what happens if you're in a crowd? If you're in a group of 5, 10, 20 people? How much responsibility does any one individual in that circumstance feel to help? It's less. It goes down. And actually, research has shown us that in a large group of people, the chance of any one person acting effectively or lending a hand is very low. This can actually cause an entire group of people, a very large crowd of people that are on scene during an emergency or somebody needs help, to do nothing. Because the individual responsibility any one person feels has been diffused to a level that's below the threshold where you're actually likely to help. So what can you do about that? Well, if you know that this is a tendency that people have, and you understand that in a large group that less people are less likely to help, you can remind yourself consciously, stop, step back, and say, wait a minute, this is a pretty big group. That actually does mean that people are less likely to help. I need to take personal responsibility. I can't just assume somebody else is going to help. I have to assume that if nobody else helps, or if I don't help, nobody will. So just taking that assumption, like just consciously countering the assumption that somebody else will help, can really teach you to lower the diffusion of responsibility. Now, another major obstacle to helping out somebody, especially when there's other people present, is something that we call group ignorance. And what do we mean by that? Well, we actually get a lot of the information about the world around us and understand what's going on in different situations from the other people that are that are nearby. Frequently, that's helpful. Like if we assume that our friends are giving us good feedback about what kind of movie is an entertaining movie to watch, we tend to assume that the group has good information, and that's not a problem. But what happens in an emergency situation where the first people on scene don't actually interpret the event correctly? Maybe they're not paying attention, maybe they think a person is drunk instead of hurt, but if the very first people onto the scene get the wrong idea of what's going on, and then every other person that arrives after them uses those first people as the basis of understanding the situation, what happens? You can wind up in a situation where nobody in an entire group of people actually knows what's really going on. And as a result, they don't help when they could. So what can you do to counter that? Well, if you're in a situation where there's something unclear going on, where somebody may be in need of help, or there might be some kind of emergency, don't just assume that the people around you have a good idea of what's going on. The best thing that you can do is to actually find a local authority, be it a manager, a police officer, somebody who actually is responsible for knowing what's going on, and ask them. That can be extremely helpful. Another thing that you can do is if something's unclear, you can actually, assuming that it's safe to do so, go up to the person themselves and say, excuse me, do you need any help? Is there something wrong? What can I do? And by you specifically getting clear information from either that person or from an authority figure, not only do you now have the right idea of what's going on, anybody else who's around you and listening to the exchange will have the good information that they need to act effectively. Now, one final barrier to helping somebody in need, which is not a mistake, is when the cost exceeds the rewards. Like what if somebody's having a fist fight, or somebody's having a knife fight even, or somebody's being threatening and drunk? Do you really just want to uncritically jump into the middle of that situation? No. And doing so would actually be unwise. Like, you could actually aggravate the situation, you could get hurt, you could make things worse. So in that case, it really might be the wisest thing not to directly intervene because the costs exceed the rewards. Now, what can you do in that kind of situation? Well, if there's any kind of element of danger, you can step back and try to call for help using a cell phone, get a hold of the police, take yourself out of being personally in the middle of that conflict situation. Another thing that you can do is remind yourself that if you really think that this is a situation where helping is the right thing to do, you just got to do it. So you have to make the conscious decision whether or not you think it's a good idea to help. If so, what's a wise way to help? And if helping's not the right thing to do, and you decide at the end of the day not to get involved, I think that's okay. To me, it's a very different process not helping somebody out because you just automatically didn't think they needed help, or you automatically assumed something that wasn't true. An automatic process resulted in you not helping. Very different from you making a conscious decision not to help because it's unwise to do so. So, I work with kids a lot, and they'll ask me sometimes, am I a bad person if I don't help in some of these complex or potentially dangerous situations? And I say no. What you've done is you taught yourself a way of being able to consciously analyze these situations and to figure out whether or not it's the right thing to do. So that's a very core skill that you can use.